Hi, this is David Micheline, and I wrote Amazing Spider-Man, and you're listening to Amazing Spider Talk.
Two men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to dangle. Be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The Amazing Spider Talk, the Amazing Spider Talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the Amazing Spider Talk.
Hello and welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk. My name is Dan Gvozden and I'm the editor of SuperiorSpiderTalk.com.
And I'm Mark Ginocchio, the founder of the Chasing Amazing blog and now currently an editor at SuperiorSpiderTalk.com.
Woo! Well, thanks everybody for joining us for the special episode of Amazing Spider Talk. This is one of our Amazing Spider Talk and their Amazing Friends episodes. So we hope you enjoy this podcast and that it provides intelligent conversation between two fans and collectors and creators as we hope to look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture.
Yeah, Dan, and for our guest in this episode, this is a very special guest for both of us because he's kind of can be credited, or as he will later say in the interview, blamed for as our gateway drug into comics. It's Spider-Man writer David Micheline, who, of course, wrote many issues of Web Spider-Man and then enjoyed that very storied run on Amazing Spider-Man in the 80s and 90s that covered his collaborations with Todd McFarlane and Erik Larsen and Mark Bagley. He is credited with creating Venom, Carnage, Round Robin, which I know, isn't that a favorite story of yours, Dan, or at least a story that you like? Or
I did a book report on it as a child, as a last-minute book report when I didn't read a book. And so I tried to pass this comic off as a book for a book report. So yes, it has a good place in my heart there.
Well, anyway, we have him over the internet, over the phone. We did some special machinations here to make this happen, and obviously we're both very thrilled that we were able to get David on the show. And just hearing him talk about his time at Marvel and with the Spider books, I mean, it definitely brought back a lot of great memories for me as an 8 and 9-year-old and 10, 11, 12, 13. I mean, he was on the book for so many years. I mean, it really kind of took me through my teen years.
Yeah, me too. And this was just a joy to do. So as per usual, if you hear this sound, please check out your iOS device for a link to an article, video, or image to enhance your listening experience. And, of course, we're going to have a ton of great images for this episode, all of Todd McFarlane's creations and Mark Bagley and all the wonderful artists that David got to work with in the 90s. But I guess we should just get to it, Mark. Our interview with David Micheline.
Spider-Man and his amazing friends, Iceman and Firestar.
Yeah, so Dan and I are here with a very special guest here for Amazing Spider Talk. This is David Micheline, who, of course, is a long-term comic book writer who enjoyed a very landmark run on Amazing Spider-Man in the late 1980s and early 1990s. He created a couple of characters I'm sure many of you are familiar with. He wrote for other Spider-Man books. He also enjoyed probably one of the most definitive runs on Iron Man in the 1980s. He created a certain character some of you are probably seeing in the movie theaters right now, Scott Lang as Ant-Man. So again, this is probably one of the bigger comic book creator personality types we've had on. So David, thank you very much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm very flattered and very happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, David, we in the comic book world, we always refer to the beginnings of somebody as their origin story. So I guess the best way to start with this interview is just to ask you a little bit about how you first got into the world of comic books. I mean, what was kind of your gateway into that? Was this a field that you wanted to come into, or did you just kind of find yourself in it?
Well, both. When I grew up reading comics, there were no credits. So I actually had no idea that people actually wrote them. I loved reading them as a kid, and I always wanted to be a writer, but I figured I'd be writing in prose and that sort of stuff. But how I got into it, I was working for a commercial film production company in Indiana. I was living in Kentucky across the river at the time, and DC Comics started something they called the apprenticeship program, where they would bring people in to work in the offices in New York and learn the business. So I sent some sample writing into them, and for some reason my samples, instead of going to the apprenticeship program, ended up on editor Joe Orlando's slush pile, which is unsolicited manuscripts. And Joe's assistant at the time, Michael Fleischer, came in from lunch one day, had a few minutes, picked up the top script from the slush pile, read it. It happened to be mine. And he sent me a letter saying, you show potential, but we can't work with anyone outside of the immediate New York area. If you're ever in or around, feel free to contact us again. Well, 2 weeks later, I had closed out all of my contracts, my writing in Kentucky, and I'd moved to New York, and I kind of showed up on DC's doorstep saying, well, here I am. I think they were a little afraid at that point. It was like, oh, my God, what do we do? The guy's moved here, and, we have to give him a chance. So I worked with Michael Fleischer on my first 4 scripts for the DC mystery books. They call them mystery books, the horror books, House of Secrets, House of Mystery, etc. And by the time Michael left to write the Little Orphan Annie newspaper strip, I'd learned enough to work directly with Joe Orlando. I ended up spending 5 years writing for DC, and that's how I got into comics. This is back in 1973.
Do you have any books or characters that you really loved as a child, that you'd reliably pick up?
Oh, of course. I was mostly a DC fan, and I loved the off-the-wall characters. I mean, I read some Superman, a little bit of Batman, but I loved characters like Rip Hunter, Time Master, and Challengers of the Unknown, and Space Ranger, Atomic Knights, like that. And even in superheroes, I gravitated to the less big star, the Flash, Green Lantern, the Atom, characters like that. So, yeah, I would pick those up whenever I had a dime. Boy, does that age me or not.
So at what point you were DC for 5 years? Was that when you were on Aquaman?
That's when I did most of my DC stuff. I did, 8 or 9 Aquaman stories. Yeah, that was during that 5-year period.
Because I was trying to think, you're the one you were with Aqua Boy, right, or the son of Aquaman, that story, right? Weren't you the?
Well, it's kind of funny that I was at a screening, a local screening of the Ant-Man movie, and I was introduced from a guy who owns the local comic shop. And it's a friend of mine. He's a nice guy, and he introduced me as the guy who wrote this, wrote that, and killed Aquaman's son.
Well, I didn't want to lead with that, but
it's always the deaths that define you, yeah?
I wonder if that'll be my epitaph on my gravestone.
Say that's okay. Jerry Conway still goes around talking about how he killed Gwen, so he'll never shake that.
Wow. Well, do you think now there'll be a Spider Aquaman's baby? I mean,
with Hollywood, you never know.
That's true. That's true.
So at what point did you? What was your entryway into Marvel after your DC run?
Well, I had met Jim Shooter at conventions, and I had always been a Marvel fan. I love Marvel comics. It's Marvel that got me back into reading comics back when I was in college and entered my second childhood. I I was kind of screwed by DC after 5 years, which disappointed me very much. And I called Jim Shooter. I said, would it be possible to get some work from Marvel? And his response was, would today be too soon? And very, very flattering. Unfortunately, I was under a contract still with DC, but when I finished that, I went right over to Marvel, and Jim handed me 17 pages of an Avengers story to script, and right that day. So I felt very much more wanted and appreciated at Marvel. I remember walking down the halls, and Shooter will be walking by and say, "Are you happy? Are they treating you well?" And it's like, holy cow, they appreciate writers here. This is great. So that's how I actually got into working for Marvel, the transition from DC.
Early on in your career at Marvel, you created Scott Lang and the Taskmaster. What was your process in creating new characters in these long-established series like for the Avengers or Iron Man?
Any new character depends on the situation, the background, the editor, and what you see needs to be done. Now, and as far as Taskmaster, when I first started working for Marvel, there were a couple of gaps in the Marvel Universe, things that I, as a reader, didn't understand. It's like, one of them was like, where do all these goons come from? Every bad guy seems to have hordes of I guess real-world minions. Where do they come from? Is there a Thugs R Us store on the corner? I mean, is there an ad in the newspaper? Idiots, who want to get, high risk, low pay, and wear a costume. So I figured there's got to be somewhere these guys come from, and that's where Taskmaster happened. I figured here's a guy who's got this ability that at the time was unique of basically eidetic reflexes or something. He sees something and he can do it. He can perform it. Muscle memory becomes natural. And so instead of being, going out and fighting heroes or bad guys for danger, he trains other guys to do that so he can stay out of the danger. That was the original concept. But it was like that's where Taskmaster came from. I saw a need to explain something in the Marvel Universe. And it fit with the Avengers because, he has so many powers and Avengers have so many characters. As far as Scott Lang is concerned, there was no Ant-Man at the time. Hank Pym was off being Giant Man and Goliath. And I thought, well, Ant-Man's a cool character. There should be a new one. So I wanted to come up with the civilian identity that was very interesting, that I liked, and that was, would be something a little different. And the main thing so I came up with a guy who was an ex-burglar, who was trying to go straight, but forced back into the life because his daughter was in danger, essentially. She, in the comics, she had a heart condition. She needed an operation, but the only person who could perform that and with any chance of her surviving had been kidnapped. So Scott needed the Ant-Man costume and abilities to rescue the doctor that is needed to save his daughter. And I thought the character, here's a single father with a daughter. I mean, how many times has that been done? At the time, now I don't know how many. Back then it was something unusual. And I love the idea that there's this 9-year-old girl whose father's a superhero and she can't tell anyone. I mean, she's at school and someone says, "Hey, my father can beat your father," and she says, "Oh yeah, well my father's." Oh yeah, I mean, got it inside. So anyway, that's where Ant-Man came from. I saw again a gap in the Marvel universe. There was no Ant-Man, so I filled that gap with Scott Lang.
I mean, and obviously, both these characters have endured. So, I mean, even if unique at the time, but I mean, like. The first are the pioneers. I mean, they kind of stand. I mean, did you get a sense that these characters would kind of stick around, or I mean, were you like, well, I'll just do this and see what happens with them?
I never thought about basically what would happen in the future. I mean, at the time, I wrote stories and characters that I thought were entertaining, that I would enjoy writing, that people would enjoy reading about. And if you do something good and it's quality, it'll endure. I didn't really think about, what would happen in the future, just maybe what I would do with those characters in the future, but their popularity was something that would happen or not happen.
Now, obviously, I mean, your run on Iron Man, I mean, for years was kind of considered the Iron Man. And, obviously, I mean, Demon in the Bottle is probably one of the landmark stories in comic book history. And I'm just curious when you enter onto these, big franchise books like an Iron Man or Spider-Man or Avengers, I mean, what's your approach in terms of like changing the universe, so to speak, or implementing major change in the characters? I mean, do you see yourself as actively trying to do that, or do you have that? There's some creators that talk about, well, you can play with the toys, but you have to put them back when you're done and make sure they're not too messed up. I mean, what's your approach when it comes to that, considering what you've accomplished with some of these big books over the years?
Well, again, it depends on the character and the situation. I believe, if something's not broke, don't fix it. But everybody is going to probably bring his or her personality and viewpoint to a character. I don't change characters just to change them. If I make changes, it's because I think something can be strengthened or something might make the character work a little better. With Iron Man, when I came to Marvel, I had never read an Iron Man comic. So I read the last 5 or 6 issues or stories in script form. And I saw this guy whose world was coming apart. Someone was trying to take over his company. He was having problems with S.H.I.E.L.D. The government was trying to regulate superheroes, which complicated his life as head of the Avengers. And I thought, I always tried to write Iron Man as Tony Stark, either Tony Stark in metal suit, Tony Stark in an Armani suit. Okay, Tony Stark's a real person. He's a superhero with no superpowers. His superpower is his brain, but he's essentially just a human being. With all these pressures, it just seemed logical he'd need an escape valve, or he's going to explode. He had been established as a playboy and shown that he, drinking at cocktail parties and stuff. So it just seemed, again, an organic progression that he would start going to the alcohol to kind of release the tension and the stress, and that it would start to get the best of him. And that's where that change came from. It was a big change, but to me it was a logical change, and it was one that didn't really alter the character. It just showed an aspect of the character that was there to develop. What happens to the character after that, it depends on the next person who writes it or edits it. Did that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. No, I just, like there are some people who, they talk about the, reverence for Kirby and Lee and Ditko, which, I mean, I'm sure you had, but it's, but it's almost like over reverence where they don't want to take a risk with a character, but, I mean, obviously what you did, I mean, like you said, it was within the character, but there were risks involved. I mean, a story like Demon in a Bottle, I don't think had ever even been attempted. I mean, we had the Green Lantern, Green Arrow, the Speedy does heroin stories in the 70s, but this for a main character, this was very daring. I would say, I don't know, my humble opinion.
Well, I guess it was, but I have to give props to Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter, because and when I speak in we, referring to Iron Man as my co-plotter, Bob Layton, when we came up with the pitch, when I came up with the idea, Bob, and I developed it, we pitched it to Jim Shooter, the only qualification that he gave us was do it well.
Yeah.
He saw it as a good idea. He had confidence in us and what we would do, and he just said, do it well. And that was, of course, what we had planned to do from the start, if we could. But you talk about reverence. There's a difference between reverence and respect. Like, I don't revere any of the people that came before me, but I do respect them and respect what they did. And essentially, I wish all creators would do that. There's been experience it's my experiences where that isn't the case, but I won't talk about them. But like when Bob and I came back to co-plot our second run on Iron Man, Denny O'Neil had been writing it, and he had set up some things that that Bob and I really didn't want to deal with, some characters and some situations. So we didn't come in right away and, those don't count anymore, we're going to ignore them. We took a 2-issue arc where we resolved those situations so we could go where we wanted to, but still respecting what had gone before and respecting what Denny had done, and we tried to come up with, storylines that seemed logical and respectful of what he had done, but eased the way into what we wanted to do. So I think there's a difference between reverence and respect.
So your first Spider-Man story that I could find was a Marvel team-up book, number 103, where you got to incorporate Scott Lang and Taskmaster into a team-up with Spider-Man, which is awesome. But did you ever foresee yourself, after this book, getting a long run with Spidey?
I don't think I foresaw myself. I certainly would love to do a long run on Spidey. Spider-Man was my favorite comic book superhero ever, and it was him alone that got me back into reading comics. It was when I was a sophomore in college. I was playing in a band, and I remember I'd given up at age 14. I gave up reading comics because I wanted to quote grow up unquote, and I gave all my comics away. About like 500 comics. Which could probably buy me an island now, but
you mean your mom didn't throw them away?
No, my mom was pretty cool. She didn't like monster magazines, but comics were cool. So anyway, when I was 19, I guess, I was sitting on I was visiting our bass player, and I was sitting on an army trunk in his basement, and he went to. I got up and he went up to look at something in the trunk. And he opened it up, and it's full of comics. And he was like 20. I'm 19. And here's this guy who's older than me. He reads comics. I said, you read comics? I said, oh, yeah, it's great. There's a character, Spider-Man. He's not like, this godlike superhero. He's like a real person. He runs to catch an elevator, and it closes before he can get there. And he flags down a cab, and it goes by and splashes it with mud just like you and me, like real people. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I went to a convenience store, to their spinner rack, and there was the latest issue of Spider-Man, and behind one of the stacks there was a previous issue. It was a 2-part story. I think it was like issue 67, 68. And I read them, and I was hooked. So I've loved Spider-Man ever since. He's my favorite character. The idea of actually writing a Spider-Man story was terrific. And the idea of writing a long run, well, that would just be wonderful. So I didn't foresee it, but it was something I always had wanted to do.
Well, of course, you did eventually get a sustained run when you started on Web of Spider-Man in, I guess it was around the mid-'80s when that book came out. I mean, you came on fairly early. I mean, what was your approach? I mean, were you told that this was going to kind of be an ongoing thing for you, or were you filling in on some issues and then it just kind of became, issue after issue? How did you go into that? Do you remember?
Yeah, Web of Spider-Man was assigned to me, so I was the regular writer on it for a while. So it was something that I wrote every month. So it was a regular series, my first chance to write Spider-Man on a regular basis.
We've talked to different people over the years, and we've kind of heard two different answers to this question. I mean, when you were writing it, was Web supposed to be its own thing in terms of the tone versus amazing versus spectacular, or was it supposed to kind of feel connected to the other Spider books? Like I said, that answer always changes. So I'm curious from the people who actually worked on it, what they say.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Editor Jim Owsley, who later changed his name to Christopher Priest, wanted the 3 books to have separate identities. He wanted Amazing Spider-Man, which was written by Tom DeFalco, to be the standard, what you're used to Spider-Man hero book. He wanted the Spectacular Spider-Man, being written by Peter David at the time, to be the dark Spider-Man, the dark, gritty stories. Web of Spider-Man, written by me, was supposed to be traveling Spider-Man. He wanted it to be in different locations, different settings, which, being a freelance news photographer, offered those opportunities. So it gave it its own identity, but it wasn't exactly what I had in mind. I mean, it took me away from most of the supporting cast who lived in New York. And it took me away from one of the most important members of the supporting cast, New York itself. So here I was in the hills of Kentucky or in Ireland or in Kansas, and coming up with stories for these places with, I guess, Joy Mercado was the reporter that went with him sometime. That was about the only ongoing supporting cast member that I could use from issue to issue. So that's the story of the different viewpoints of the 3 Spider-Man books at the time.
Well, you would eventually get Peter back to New York in Web of Spider-Man, and there's a special moment in Web of Spider-Man 18 where a mysterious hand pushes Peter towards a subway car. We've talked to Tom DeFalco and Jim Salicrup about this, and they told us about this female Venom plans. Do you remember what the original plans for this character were and what happened to those plans?
Oh, absolutely. There was also a second little teaser that came into a book. I don't know the number of, but Web of Spider-Man that I had plotted before I switched over to Amazing that someone else scripted, where Spider-Man is on clinging to the side of a building, and a hand comes out from a window, grabs his ankle, and slings him off, and it doesn't trigger his spider sense. That was the whole key to these things, because the alien symbiote had been established as not triggering the spider sense. That was supposed to be the clues to reader that there's something happening. There's something with the symbiote. My original idea was to have, what I was setting up in Web, was to have a female character, a woman who had been in labor, and her husband had taken her outside and was trying to flag down a cab to get her to the hospital. And I was going to tie it in with a graphic novel, The Revenge of the Living Monolith. And the husband steps out into the street to flag down a cab, but the cabbie's looking up at Spider-Man fighting the living monolith, and he hits the husband and kills him. The woman at that point is so traumatized, she goes into labor, she loses the baby, her husband's killed, she goes into a catatonic state. When she comes out of it, finally, she blames Spider-Man for these deaths, and focuses her loss and her disturbed personality into a hatred for Spider-Man, whom she blames for these 2 deaths. And at that point, the symbiote, hating Spider-Man for rejecting it, finds her, joins with her, as they become the character that became Venom, whose sole purpose in life was to kill Spider-Man. So that was what I originally had planned. Now, when I was switched over to Amazing, Jim Salicrup wanted to do something special for issue 300. So I suggested this character that I was started to develop and tease in Web of Spider-Man. He liked the idea, but he didn't, at the time at least, think he thought readers might have a problem with a female character, a villain, going toe-to-toe with Spider-Man. Now, that, of course, would not be the case today, I'm sure. But he asked if I would change it to a male character. So I came up with a different origin. I came up with the Eddie Brock character, tied that in with one of Peter David's spectacular Spider-Man stories, and gave Eddie a reason to hate Spider-Man, and then for the symbiote to join with him to become Venom, a character, a villain whose sole motivation is to kill Spider-Man. And that's the whole story of the origin.
Yeah, well, I mean, for something that was changed, kind of in the, I don't want to say the 11th hour, but, changed. I mean, he ended up creating probably one of the most famous characters of the last 30 years. I mean, did you ever get a sense that, and I know when I asked this earlier, you say you never truly get a sense, but I guess with Venom, I mean, were you surprised by just how much that character took off?
How much? By what standards? What do you mean?
Well, it just seems. Well, I mean, in terms of, Venom's popularity, it just seemed that everybody. I mean, I read the Venom comics were some of the first comics I read when I was younger, and I just remember, the talk around, the talk around the block was, this character is awesome. Like we want more Venom. We want Venom in comics. When Venom showed up the second time and they fought on the beach, everyone wanted those issues. When Venom was on the island, they wanted those issues. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, Venom was just this phenom for, I think, a certain generation of readers. And to the point that I think there's people who today are still just very fondly remember this character. And I wonder, was it kind of both a blessing and a curse for you? Because it seemed like as time went on into the 90s, you had to use Venom more and more. And, like, oh, Maximum Carnage, there's this, there's that. I mean, did that kind of surprise you, just how much the character became such a thing, I guess?
Yeah, I guess it kind of surprised me because, like, I just wrote a character that I thought would be a cool character. One, again, that I would enjoy writing, people would enjoy reading about. And you say about using it, and it was true. Sales spiked when Venom was used. But you're talking about it being used more and more. I got to give props to Jim Salicrup, the editor, because he kept a close rein on Venom. He turned down requests of other editors to use him, and he never forced me to use the character. So the only times that Venom, when Jim was editing the book, when Venom appeared was when I had an idea for something new, for something that progressed the character, for something that we hadn't seen before. And I think that was one of the factors in the character's popularity, because every time he came out in a book, in an issue of Amazing, during that era, you saw something they hadn't seen before. Here's another aspect of the relationship. Here's an aspect of the character. Here's something that hasn't been done before. Then the editors changed, and the new editor's policy was totally different. He opened up Venom to everyone. In fact, the editor himself, was the first person to write Venom besides me. And he also wanted to use Venom. He was very event-oriented. The crossovers happened. The multi-issue things happened. Venom, here's Carnage. The last thing I did totally on my own during the editorial was something I started with the Carnage issues, and unfortunately the new editor allowed me to do them the way I wanted to before he started having a heavier hand in the process. So that's why, Venom started appearing more and appearing other places. And I think that's why, one of the reasons why his popularity grew previously, because it was more rare, and there was a reason for having a Venom story instead of just, kicking up sales.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember Venom showing up was the event when I was a kid.
There you go.
It was like, I still, well, Dan and I recently, we did an episode. We're doing on the show kind of a run on what we find to be essential Spider-Man stories that are maybe a little more outside the box. And one of the ones we picked was that first full, I think it was like a 3-part arc with Venom, where, kind of culminate, he breaks out of prison, and it culminates with him and Spider-Man fighting on the beaches of Montauk. And we just, one of the things we commented on was, like you said, there was just like a new surprise with the character every issue, which is, I think, what, for readers like me at least, made him so popular.
Yeah.
And I think it's safe to say, Mark, that both you and I got into reading comics by the hook of Venom, or at least Venom and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Well, the other big moment in your early run of Amazing Spider-Man was the proposal, engagement, and marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. And, this story has been, talked over by people, left and right for the past however many years, about how suddenly it came together, or, was this a company mandate? What were your thoughts on the development of this story, and what was your approach in trying to make it work?
Okay, it was indeed a mandate from the company. The way I have heard it from people who should know is that Stan Lee, who was writing the newspaper strip at the time, wanted to marry off Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson in the newspaper strip. So it was decided that, okay, if he's going to do that, then it needs to be done in the comics. That came from above Jim Shooter. I hated it. I thought two things. First off, this isn't the character. I mean, I wanted to write the Spider-Man that I read that got me into comics. That was a student who, had trouble, with his life and then juggling this and that. Not a married man. I mean, also, I was not married at the time, so I was a student. I don't know what it's like to be married. I've never been married. And most of the people reading, I mean, the median age, I think, is probably higher now, but I think was 15 years old, 15, 16, of people reading the comics then. And, that not a lot of the 15, 16-year-olds are married. I really don't want to do this. But my pleas fell on deaf ears. It was something that's going to happen. There's nothing I could do about it. So I figured, okay, if it's got to be done, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to make it a happy marriage. I'm going to have a good relationship. I'm going to have love. I'm not going to have, bickering. I'm not going to have Mary Jane, complaining about Peter being Spider-Man being more popular than her as an actress. I'm not going to have, oh, Peter, don't go out. You're in danger. Oh, Peter, don't do this. I was going to give the poor schmuck a bit of happiness. He's been through so much. Let's have him have a happy marriage and let's have it work. So that was my approach. And I worked hard at that, and I was pretty happy with the way it came out, even though I hated the idea of it. I kind of liked what we did with it.
It's so funny. I don't think Dan and I have talked to a single person who said, yeah, I liked that Peter and Mary Jane were married, and yet when they were broken up in the comics, there was just so much outrage. So it's just you just go all the way back, and it's like, if it wasn't for the comic strip with Stan Lee, I mean, this probably would have never happened. I mean, that's True. What it sounds like. It's not like any, you or Tom DeFalco or Jerry Conway or anyone was like, yeah, what we need is a married Peter. No one has said that.
Yeah.
The other big thing from your work on Amazing Spider-Man was, of course, you got to work with three, I think, of the bigger artists who have worked on the character in Todd McFarlane, Erik Larsen, and Mark Bagley. And I guess, the start of those three, I mean, Todd McFarlane is kind of, he's almost his own, well, he's not even almost, he's his own separate thing in terms of comics now. It's like, on another stratosphere. I mean, when he came in, I know that he was, when we talked to Jim Salicrup, he mentioned how he kind of brought Todd in and tried to nurture him. So, what was your collaboration with Todd like in the beginning there?
Well, I remember Jim showing me, suggesting Todd, and I looked at some of his previous work, and I thought, well, this looks interesting. Sure, let's give this a try. And I have no negative memories of working with Todd. It was like he was a thorough professional. He stuck to the plot. He was a very clear storyteller, which as a story writer myself is probably the most important thing in an artist. At the time, work was done what was called Marvel style, which is basically the plot is written, it's sent to a penciler draws it, pages are sent to the writer, he adds the dialogue, captions, the sound effects, that goes to an inker, a letter, and then an inker to finish. So I was actually writing my words to the pictures that Todd drew, and his pictures were so interesting and exciting that it made my work better. It made the dialogue crisper, more interesting, more entertaining, hopefully. So, and I can say he was a thorough professional. I remember one instance, like when I work with an artist on a regular basis, I try to gear at least parts of my story to their strengths and to their desires, because when an artist is happy with what they're doing, they're going to do better work. So I asked through Jim Salicrup if there's anything Todd wanted to draw. And Todd was reluctant because he had just gotten on the book, and I was told, again through Salicrup, that he really didn't want to seem pushy or something, like he wanted this do this way. I thought that was incredibly professional. And finally said, well, he'd kind of like to draw someone with a cape. So I said, okay. So I did a Prowler story because not many Spider-Man villains have capes. But it was great. It was great working with Todd. It was a wonderful experience. He did a terrific Spider-Man.
I mean, was there a sense within Marvel that this guy was going to take off the way he was very humble there, so probably not. I mean, it's not like he came in as some hotshot, so probably not then, right?
No, there wasn't a sense. I don't know his sense, but at Marvel, I think there was a growing sense of, wow, yeah, hey, this guy's pretty cool, and wow, the sales are going up, and we may have something here. So I don't know what Todd's attitude was, but whatever his attitude was, he remained a professional artist. So that was what was important to me.
What was it like being a writer on the book with seeing the sales come in? I mean, I don't know if the sales on the book have ever been as high as they were then. And then you have Todd getting his own Spider-Man #1, and that book just, blowing up, in terms of sales. What was it like to be involved in Marvel, and especially on the Spider-Man books during this time?
Well, it was generally great. I mean, especially the royalty checks. What can I tell you? But the funny thing was, it was a period of growth and popularity in comics in the 90s, but the sales really grew when Todd was the penciler. But something, they actually got even higher when Erik got on, and even higher when Mark got on. It was. I mean, Todd was the beginning. He gave it the inertia, the push that, and he kept getting new writers. I like to think that, the consistency of characterization through my stories helped, but, the wave of popularity just kept growing, and the sales kept going up, and it was like, especially when I was working with Jim Salicrup, he gave me a great deal of freedom, depending on his, if I did stuff that he, approved. And, it was, and working with a good artist and working with an editor gave me some freedom, and working on my favorite character of all time. It was the golden age of my career.
Yeah, I mean, and the book would be double shipping for periods during this period too. I know during your run with McFarlane, but I think also during the Larsen and Bagley years. So, I mean, in terms of Spider-Man is a double ship book, it seems perpetually now, but at the time that was unique. I mean, was that, what kind of pressure did that put on you in terms of scripting to get to double the output? I mean, was that manageable?
All other things going well, yes. If the editor is doing his or her job, if the penciler is doing his or her job, I was able to do my job. And, it gave me an opportunity to write 3 more stories a year. To do things, keep things going. It was, again, my favorite character. If things are not going so well, it's not fun. And there was an editorial change. And you'll notice under Jim Salicrup, there was never a fill-in issue. The editors changed, and at least 3 times there were fill-ins. And one of them was the bi-monthly summer issues. Things got so far behind. I was always on time with plots, let me say that. But the book got so far behind that I was forced to have fill-in issues. And I gave up those summer issues one year, 3 months worth, and I was working ahead on the next issue. By Thanksgiving schedule, we were behind again. And I have no control over that. All I have control over is when I do my plots. And if they're on time, everything else is, I can't control. So, when everything's behind and I'm not giving time and it looks to me to catch up and I can't catch up because other people are behind, the work's taken away from me. The paychecks are taken away from me. The consistency of characterization is taken away from me. So at that point, doubling up on buy issues became a very negative thing.
We've talked a little bit about Todd McFarlane. What was your collaboration process with Erik Larsen and Mark Bagley?
Erik hated me, so that wasn't cool. I wrote a letter to Wizard Magazine. They had mentioned something about Todd McFarlane being co-creator of Venom. Well, it's a matter of semantics, but I had the character worked out before Todd was brought on to Amazing Spider-Man. He visualized the character, but no one was with me when I came up with the idea and the development of the character. And I wrote them a very polite letter saying Todd McFarlane's great. You know, I love what he did on the books. It never would have been as popular without him. But I had created this character when I was writing Web of Spider-Man. Todd didn't reply, but Erik sent a letter, and they sent me a fax of it, which I no longer have, unfortunately, which he called me a clown. He called my work stupid. And he gave Todd credit for, Todd drew this and he did that. And the funny thing was, he said, and Todd came up with the long, foot-long tongue and the green drool. If you go back, Todd didn't do that. That didn't happen until Erik. So Erik actually gave Todd credit for something he had done. So I'd also heard from more than one person that Erik was at conventions saying that Marvel had no good writers. Well, he was only working with me at the time. So who else is talking? So all of this did not make for a wonderful working relationship. You know, if he didn't like me, didn't like my work, why didn't he just leave and get something else? Probably because he was making too much money, but that's mere supposition. Bagley, Mark and I had different perspectives on storytelling. Mark seemed to have an attitude that a number of artists have, that plots are general. Now, my plots were 5 or 6 pages long. They're very detailed. They worked out, you know, A went to B, went to C, went to D. And Mark had, I'll give one example. I don't remember the issue number. I don't remember the specifics. So, you know, with that in mind, there was an issue where I had, there was some people stealing stuff at Empire State University. And my plot, they're doing this. Spider-Man swings onto the scene. There's an incident that happens that triggers one of the bad guys to say something that Spider-Man uses later when he hears something else as a clue to find out where they are at the end of the book. There was a specific incident that happened that triggered that naturally, that comment. Well, when I got the pages, they're the crooks doing that. The incident happens that triggers the comment, and then Spider-Man swings onto the scene. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If Spider-Man isn't there when this guy says this, how is he going to put together, you know, later to get the clue? You know, so I called Mark, and I explained it to him, and his attitude, and I am quoting directly here, was, and I quote, well, it's your story. Not, oh, I understand. Oh, yeah, that needs that sequence. It's, well, it's your story. Which, again, if you have A, B, C, D, and it's drawn A, C, B, D, it's not going to work. And he seemed to be very concerned about the visuals. I choreograph action stuff very carefully. I try to use the unique elements of the character. With Spider-Man, it would be wall crawling, webbing, spider sense, acrobatics. And I try to choose settings where the props can be interesting, a carnival, an automobile graveyard, something that can you know, that not just, you know, they're hitting each other inside of, you know, outside on the street. Mark had a tendency to choreograph these things himself, which I imagine was because he wanted to do stuff that he thought was dynamic and interesting and was concerned about the visuals. I was just wasting my time. Eventually, I got to a point where I just leave it to him. I would say, okay, here's 3 pages of fight. It starts like this, it ends like this, and just let him do what he wanted to do, because it was just wasting my time choreographing the fight. So, again, I don't mean to say anything bad about Mark. I mean, obviously, he's still very popular, getting lots of work. Everybody loves him. That's great. More power to him. It's just he and I looked at the storytelling process very differently, and it was not a melding of creative minds towards the same goal.
No, that's totally. Yeah, I mean, some people just have a different kind of dynamic. I mean, you know, like it's that just
Sure.
makes sense. Do you remember your reaction to the whole Image revolution during this time? I know that affected two of the people you had worked with, in Todd and Erik. I mean, especially with like the whole debate about who created or co-created Venom, coming kind of that argument stemming from Erik, and the whole point of the whole Image founding was this artist creator rights thing. I mean, did you kind of sit back and look at this and be like, what kind of BS is this? Or were you like, more power to you guys? I mean, I'm just curious what, from someone who was not in the throes of it, but who obviously knew the people involved.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, there have been attempts to start other companies in the past with some success and a lot of failures. And I really didn't have an opinion or much thoughts, because I had plenty of work at Marvel. I was making a living, and my dance card was full. I was writing Spider-Man. So I was just a very impartial observer, and thought, well, that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. But I really didn't think about it very much.
One of the other big villains you created during your Amazing Spider-Man run was Carnage. What went into the development of that character? Where did this idea come from?
Well, one of the elements, there are two elements about Venom that a lot of people didn't seem to recognize. One was his unique motivation, that he wanted to kill Spider-Man. And that's another thing that Erik in his letter said, well, here's this cliche. What's so unusual about that? He wants to kill Spider-Man. Everyone wants to kill Spider-Man. Well, no, they didn't. Dr. Octopus, the Rhino, Green Goblin, all of these people wanted to commit their crimes. They wanted to stay away from Spider-Man. But the only character who was actually going after Spider-Man was Kraven, and that was because he was a hunter and Spider-Man was good prey, not because he just wanted to kill him. So it was actually a unique motivation. People didn't really see that, although I did a story, I think the one you're talking about, on the beach where, or a beach, where apparently Spider-Man's killed, Venom ceases to exist. It's Eddie Brock, and it's a symbiote again. But the other thing that people sometimes missed was the fact that although he's a psychotic serial killer, he has a sense of morality, his own twisted sense of ethics. The example I always use is that if he sees a kitten in a tree, he'll go save the kitten. Now, if he has to smash through a bus full of nuns and orphans to do it, killing most of them, he'll do it because, by God, he's going to save that kitten because he's a good guy. He's the hero. I wanted to point that out, that it's a twisted sense of morality, but it is a sense of morality. So I wanted to create a character who was like Venom but didn't have that sense of morality, who is a totally sociopathic. So I came up with Carnage, a sociopathic, totally unremittent, not unremittent. Anyway, a total sociopath has no redeeming value. He's just a murderer, a killer who worships chaos and blood. And that's where Carnage came from. So I could contrast him with Venom, and at the same time do something that I thought the readers would never expect: team up Venom with Spider-Man. And to only team up, they'd have something that's more dangerous than Venom. Okay, here's Carnage, because he doesn't have any sense of morality. So that's where Carnage came from.
I guess one of the last kind of big ongoing arcs that came with your time on the book, and it was an arc that you never had the opportunity to complete, was involving the return of Peter's parents. And now, do you recall what the long-term plan for the storyline was? Because I mean, we've actually heard rumors that there was no long-term plan, and that's probably what I mean. What's your take on that whole plot? Like, were they supposed to be clones or androids, or were they supposed to be the real thing? I mean, how did you write them?
The rumors are true. I had no idea who they were. I mean, my last year on Amazing was not my happiest year. The new editor had a heavy hand, and I did a lot of stories as best I could, but that was stories that the editor wanted, not stuff I wanted to do. He thought it would be cool. Like I say, he was event-minded. He was very concerned about selling the book, that the book sells, and I'm sure he was sincere that he felt that was his job as editor. as the editor, for the company selling the book. He thought it'd be cool to have Peter's parents come back. I said, okay, what are they really his parents? I don't know. Are they, like you say, are they aliens? Are they clones? Are they the real thing? He didn't know. He had no idea where it was going. So for a full year, I had to play with that subplot, have a scene each issue with these people that I had no idea who they were, what their purpose was, what they were trying to do. It was very, very difficult because it's like, how do I make something interesting with these people, guys that I don't know who they are? So, I left before I know. I heard they were like, I forget what they were. They were. I don't know. It was resolved after I left the book, but that was one of the main reasons I did leave, because I realized that finally, even though I'm writing Spider-Man, my favorite character, even though I'm making a ton of money, I'm just not happy anymore. So that was the reason I left.
I have to ask you about, when we're talking about rumors, I have to ask you about Web of Spider-Man 20 and that series, that there's so much talk around this supposed bomb threat involving the IRA at Marvel headquarters that evacuated the building and then caused a change in the storyline. Can you speak about what actually happened with this story and with this supposed bomb threat?
Yeah, I haven't talked about it before because, you don't want to give publicity to that sort of thing. But if rumors are out there, I got to, the rumors are true. I did a story based in, well, of course, Peter Parker had to travel, so I did a story based in Ireland. I read about the troubles in Northern Ireland. I read 4 books and watched 2 TV specials and took notes about the troubles in Northern Ireland. I did my 3-part story. Plots, they were approved by Marvel. I was the thing that I wanted to say. I was not pro-IRA. I was not anti-IRA. I was not pro-England, anti-England. I went into the background of where all these troubles started, and the basis for the troubles were. What I wanted to say. The one thing I wanted to say was, killing people is bad. How can you argue with that? That was the only way I was going in this story. We did the first story. It was published. The second one was drawn, I believe. Third one was plotted. And Marvel got a bomb threat. They got called. Someone claiming to be for the IRA. Marvel, the building was evacuated. It was looked. There was no bomb. But it was scary as hell. And I was asked to rewrite the story, and I declined because there was nothing wrong with my story. I didn't say the IRA is good, the IRA is bad. I said it's bad to kill people. Right. And I declined. I didn't say I refused, but I said, okay, I will step back and I'll not say anything. You can have someone there at Marvel rewrite it. And someone did, so that it was Roxxon behind it, not the IRA, and they did it in 1 issue instead of the 2. And that was when I went over to Amazing Spider-Man. So that's that story. Yeah, it's a shame, but people are nuts. Newspaper,
Moral of the story.
Yeah, it's bad to kill people, and people are nuts. Those are 2 things in the story.
Mission accomplished, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
And now, and I promise this is the last rumor type question, but we had read somewhere that there was a story you had pitched once where you would reveal Peter's identity to the public, and I guess if this is true, what were the circumstances of the pitch, and why did editorial not run with it?
Yeah, I wanted to do a year-long story where Peter Parker's identity was revealed. I didn't want to be, his life changes forever. I wanted to be clear, at least in my talking with the media and stuff, that no, this is temporary. I wanted to explore the situation of why Spider-Man has a secret identity, which I don't think anybody at Marvel has a secret identity anymore. But at the time, it was like I had him suddenly Mary Jane, whose acting career was just about to blossom, is suddenly Mrs. Spider-Man. So that creates a little tension. Aunt May is hounded by the press. Supervillains know where to find Peter Parker, and he eventually is kept by the government in an old National Guard armory, surrounded by troops and tanks and stuff, with his relative, his wife and his aunt, and they're basically under siege. And Peter Parker, Spider-Man, has to take jobs for the government in order to pay for this, in order to get this protection for his family. And some of the jobs aren't exactly black and white, not exactly good guy stuff, but he has to protect his family. He can't do that. All the villains know where he is and stuff, know who he's related to. And I want to show the hassles that happen when he doesn't have a secret identity. And then at the end, I think I was going to do something with the Purple Man, who control people's minds, can control their memories and stuff, doing something worldwide that erased this whole year, or not the whole year, the whole thing about Peter Parker being Spider-Man, and place something in their minds that they even see, like a magazine with, Peter Parker is Spider-Man. They'll see it as, President Clinton caught again, something like that instead. And that's what I wanted to do, and that's why I wanted to do it. And it was rejected, I believe, because they thought it was too difficult to believe that this could all be swept under the table and no one would remember anything.
Well, Marvel owes you some royalty checks for doing exactly that storyline years later in a more unbelievable way.
Oh, I didn't know that. They actually did. I think I heard, like I say, I think nobody has a secret identity these days, but I didn't know they had done that. Well,
they did like a big mind wipe thing to erase the fact that Peter's identity had been revealed. So, Purple Man or no, it did happen.
Let's say, I think I like Purple Man better than Mephisto because
oh, geez. Yeah, that's happened before. When I come up with an idea and no, we can't do that because such and such, and then a year or two later, someone else comes along and does it. And I think it's largely in part to changing in editorships and changing in viewpoints and changing in the audience. But it is a little frustrating to see other people doing what I was going to do and I couldn't do it. But
yeah,
that's life. Like I say, people are nuts.
Well, David, our final question we ask all of the creators that we have on our show is, what does it mean to you personally that you're one of the few people that had the opportunity to write Spider-Man comics for a living?
It was a thrill. It was, a dream come true, essentially. I was very, very fortunate to be able to do that, and it's a highlight of my career.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, David.
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks so much for your interest. I hope your listeners get a bit of insight and entertainment from this.
I know they will. We have a lot of big Venom fans.
Hey, me too.
Let's say the Venom fans have, I think, they could probably start their own congressional district or something. There's so many. I mean, it's just.
Oh, well, if they do that, I'll run for office.
Spider-Man and his amazing friends.
Well, Mark, that was a lot of fun. So we want to thank David Micheline coming on the show again. A lot of rumors confirmed.
Yes, I didn't think we were going to get into a whole gossip mill with him, but he happily obliged, and he should get some credit for Civil War and the eventual aftermath and erasure, right?
Yeah, I mean, his story is almost exactly that. He's describing this government trying to recruit Spider-Man to do missions for them, you could very easily see that being the result of Spider-Man staying on pro registration if it had gone that way.
Yeah, and of course, David's big run on Iron Man. I mean, you have to think, would he have become involved too at some point? So
yeah, sure. Well, okay, like you said, let's wrap this thing up. Of course, you can find all of our new Amazing Spider Talk and our old Superior Spider Talk podcasts at superiorspidertalk.com, or find us on iTunes and Stitcher by searching for Amazing Spider Talk. And if you do, please be sure to leave us a rating and a comment to let us know how we're doing, and we'll read it on the air. It's the only way that our community gets larger, by reaching out to new people with new comments. And of course, if you have any opinions on the comics or David Micheline that we've discussed today, please make sure you email them to us at amazingspidertalk@gmail.com, and we'll address and read those on the air as well.
Yeah, and be sure to check out both of our Facebook pages at facebook.com/Superior Spider Talk and facebook.com/ChasingAmazing, because these are great places to keep up with us in between shows, as we put up articles that we've written, breaking news, rumors confirmed from famous Spider-Man creators. We do it all on these Facebook pages, so please check them out.
Yeah, awesome. And as always, if you want to follow the adventures of Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales in a little more detail, be sure to subscribe to our sister podcast, The Ultimate Spin. Maybe they would want it to be called our brother podcast, since it's all men doing this show. But, of course, that's hosted by Brian, Kyle, and Noor, the international cast. Check out The Ultimate Spin, our sister podcast. I'm going to keep saying it.
Yeah, and just because we didn't get to do the full sales drive this episode, Dan, doesn't mean that you all should forget to check out our friendly neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club that gets you some free stuff and helps support our show. And also, in terms of supporting our show, we also got to spend a special let me start again. And also, in terms of supporting our show, let's send a special shout-out to our theme song, courtesy of Ryland Bojack, and our outro song, courtesy of Magic.
Yeah, and also special thanks to Nick Cagnetti, Ray Sumter, Ron Friend, and Sal Buscema for our show's awesome original artwork. So, Mark, where can we find you on the internet this week?
Yeah, well, keep finding me on superiorspidertalk.com, where I just recently wrapped up the 10 greatest Peter and Mary Jane Watson stories. Dan, I hope you enjoyed this series as much as I have writing it.
Yeah. I mean, once we got to number 3, which was it was Doomed Affairs, as we discussed on the show, is probably my favorite MJ Peter story. I was really thrilled to see your top 2.
Yeah, so a couple of surprises, and keep being posted, because in the coming weeks we might be starting a new list. So keep your eyeballs peeled. And also, of course, you can find me on Twitter at ChasingASMblog. Dan, what about yourself?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, my Spider-Man account at SupSpiderTalk, with my brand new awesome avatar that I'm very happy with.
Oh, that's beautiful, Dan.
Thanks, Mark. And you can follow me on Twitter on my normal account for all my movie reviews and such at Dan Gvozden. And, of course, you can find anything that I'm doing on superiorspidertalk.com or grindmyreels.com for my movie reviews.
Yeah, are we going to get an Ant-Man review on Grind My Reels, Dan?
I put up a big Facebook thing, so maybe I'll do an Ant-Man review, but I'm definitely doing a review of a new movie called The End of the Tour, which is about David Foster Wallace, who wrote the book Infinite Jest, one of my favorite novels.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, so come on by and check it out. Mark, I was in New York the other weekend, and as per usual, I did not let you know that I was in New York.
You always forget,
one of my only friends in New York, and yet I never let you in on the fact that I'm there.
That's okay. I just go to Essa Bagel without you. So.
Yeah. Oh, you broke my heart. So there you go. But I had to fit in food into this podcast at some point. But I was in the subway, and, there was a nearly fatal incident where a man was standing, I guess on the yellow line, pretty close to the train, but a hand came out of nowhere and tried to push him in front of the train.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. I heard about this. I read about it in the New York Post. Initially, they were just blaming Mayor de Blasio for, New York going back to the bad old days. But they're wrong. It's not that. It was actually my Aunt May, who apparently was in labor and I know, she's like 90 and in labor. I mean, crazy,
Jeez.
right?
Yeah.
I know. So anyway, she was in labor, and her husband, my great uncle Ben, who we've talked about a lot, was taken her to the hospital, and he got hit by a cab and died.
What does this have to do with the subway?
Wait for it. So Aunt May decided that it was Spider-Man's fault, and I guess she thought that guy was Spider-Man and tried to push him into the subway. It was either my Aunt May or some big heavy lifting bodybuilder type. One or the other.
What is going on with Aunt May now? It's kind of deranged.
Yeah, I don't know. Apparently, when my Uncle Ben was dying on the pavement, he uttered out these words, which are obviously words to live by, which is, with great podcasts, there must also come amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next